and a very warm welcome today to Berlinale Talents. For many of you, hopefully again. For others, a very warm welcome for the first time. As you might know, we are the talent initiative of the Berlinale, inviting 200 emerging filmmakers every year. Many of you know that because you're participants of ours. And we have 14 different fields of work to present there. And one of it is the production design, where we are always very happy to find young filmmakers to discuss with us in the workshop, share their work. We are also very proud to work together with the Production Designers Collective. There I already come to our guest Inbal Weinberg. We know for a couple of years because we're doing a gathering together. And unfortunately, we do not have costume designers, I want to say, yet in our program, because Bina Daigeler, also a member of the international jury of the festival this year, is one of the first costume designer guests on our panels, but hopefully not the last. And it's great to see these two crafts tonight, and we're super happy to discuss. You might know Inbal and Bina because you work in these fields, or you definitely know their work because, for example, the billboards in 3 billboards from outside Missouri, or the holiday apartment, I would say, in The Lost Daughter. These are works from Inbal, for example, and Bina created the design that Lydia Tarr is wearing, and obviously that has a lot to do with the character, how she evolves in Tar. Or, for example, also our this year's honorary Golden Bear winner, Tilda Swinton, also in Only Lovers Left Alive. That's also one of the great works of Bina. And now, also with Tilda, for surprisingly, I would say, because when I met you two, not you the first time, but you, when we had our first chat, we were almost surprised that this is the first collaboration for the two of you. Bina worked with Pedro Almodóvar before for many films like Volver and many others, and for Inbal, The Room Next Door was the first work with Pedro and also the first collaboration with Bina. And we are very, very happy to have you two on stage and leave it absolutely to you to discuss and share your knowledge with us. And thanks for being here. And enjoy.
Thank you. Thank you so much to Christina. Yeah, Bina, so good to be here with you. You're on the jury. How are things going?
Well, I'm very, very happy that I'm today here and not alone, because I'm actually exhausted and my brain is a little bit like exhausted. And so I know with you I have a good partner, because we often had the moment that or you or me, we were exhausted during our prep time and needed help emotionally and creatively. And so I know today you will support me when I don't have the right answer for any question.
Oh, thank you for that. And yes, I also think that's a really beautiful point to bring up, the fact that collaborating is not just an artistic endeavor, but a lot of times we need to be there for each other emotionally, and in moments where department heads need support, that we are there for each other. And definitely on Pedro's project, I was one of the only outsiders, and I came to Madrid to work, and Bina was very welcoming. So definitely having that kind of support, regardless of the creative collaboration, is essential to healthy filmmaking.
Yeah, because as we all know, we are often traveling. I'm often away from home during months, and I have to work in a space that I don't know anybody. I always start with a new crew, and so I know how it is to start always new in each project. And I remember that when Inbal started, there was a moment where we had like there was like a creative issue, obviously because it's a Pedro Almodóvar movie about colors. And it was a very tense moment for everybody, for all the HODs and also for Pedro in the prep time. And the next morning I woke up and I thought, oh my God, I have to call Inbal and have to know how she has handled it. And then I said to her, hey, let's have a coffee before we are again absorbed of our prep time, and just like to have a quality time, talk about it, have a laugh, and then we start to work. And yeah, I think that was the moment where a great collaboration started.
Definitely. Another thing that was beautiful about that project is that our offices were right next to each other. We had 2 buildings next to each other, and so actually just the proximity was so nice because we would come visit each other sort of informally and would be able to see a little bit more of the process as it was happening, get to know the teams, and even just, pop by for a question or to see how a set is developing or how a mood board is developing.
Yeah, I think that is like the most important part is the sharing of the mood boards in the beginning of the prep time, and especially when you are working with a director like Pedro Almodóvar, who everybody knows loves colors. So I think the color issue for me was a huge question mark in this movie, his first English-spoken movie, is set up in New York. And I really was curious how Inbal approached it, and obviously Inbal, it was the first time that he worked with a non-Spanish production designer, and I had a lot of thoughts about it. How will she understand his vision, because he has this Spanish vision of a lot of color and energy always, and how will we bring this vision into something realistic set up in New York? And so I really was definitely very interested in how Inbal will cope with it. And we brought a little bit something from our mood board, and as our work is so visual, I think we should share it and start with that.
Yeah, we'll share a presentation of some images from that we've put together from the film, and we'll kind of go between costume design and production design.
It will come, the presentation.
So would you like to start with the first image?
So actually, a big advantage to work with Almodovar is that you have a very long prep time. I had, as a costume designer, 13 weeks for a contemporary movie that is exceptional, that normally never happens. But it's the way how he works. He wants to have his collaborators next to him and always available. But he actually wanted to have, before the 13 weeks started, already a meeting with Tilda and Julian, and if possible, all that in one weekend, already dressed. So that was a very interesting moment, and I was at that moment working in Budapest, and so meanwhile I was working on the other movie. I thought, what will I present? With what kind of mood board can I come up that is visually interesting for Pedro and makes sense for New York? That was a moment that drove me completely nuts. I couldn't get it into my head, Pedro's colors and New York. And in my job, what I often do is I work a lot out of intuition. I just somehow learned that I can trust my intuition. And I also see in my best collaborations with production designers is when they also trust their intuitions, because somehow then there happens miracles, and even if you didn't have a meeting, it comes all together. And so from Budapest, I took the car and I went to Vienna because there was the exhibition from Louis Bourgeois, and I saw this is one of the paintings that was in that exhibition, and that is during her time in New York. And I saw these colors and I said, okay, so it is possible. New York can be colorful, because if Louis Bourgeois sees it colorful, I can do that too. And so I opened my mood board with this image, and later on, that was somehow the result for me that comes together. Her turquoise Bottega Veneta bag and her Bordeaux-colored trench coat was for me the connection to these two images. And I had obviously a very long mood board. And when I presented it to Pedro, it was unfortunately per Zoom. And I didn't know at that moment that he hated Zooms. Nobody told me. I was very excited to have a Zoom meeting with Pedro after so many years again. And the mood board was really colorful. The producer had approved it. Everybody thought it was beautiful. And he went through the pictures and he said to me, "Oh my God, Bina, this is so boring." And I was like, great, good start. I had later on a call from the producer and she said, "Don't worry, Bina, it will be fine." And then that weekend when I first met Julianne Moore for the first fitting in this prep time, far before my prep time, she saw the same mood board in my room. And she stood in front of it and she said, "Oh my God, so much color. This is impossible for New York." She was like in shock. And I said, "Well, Pedro thinks that is boring." And she said, "Okay, so I have really to get prepared for his world of colors."
First of all, I want to tell you that I went to the same exhibition of Louis Bourgeois in Vienna.
Okay, and I didn't know.
I love that. I had no idea. Amazing exhibition. I love Louis Bourgeois. Actually, however, I think for me, the artist that I referenced the most was Edward Hopper when we started working on the film. And I will also echo some of the things that Bina said. I had an immense amount of prep time. I mean, when we first got the offer, I think that my agents thought it was a joke, because I had maybe like 25 weeks of prep for a contemporary movie. And I thought that I was just gonna show up every day late, and then from the first day, we were working till 9 p.m., and I was like, oh, okay, 25 weeks of this. But what was so special about Pedro's process is that he's told me many times, I don't design the sets in a vacuum. I have to see them with the actors in costume and in makeup and hair. So what we had to do is design the sets well in advance of the shoot. And we started doing camera tests a month maybe before we started shooting. And we needed to have the sets ready for us to try out different costumes, different hair and makeup. So the process itself of prep was very, very unique and really interesting. And it's kind of how Pedro thinks. To jump to color palette, and I really did feel exactly the same as Bina. And I've lived in New York for over 23 years, and it's really my home. And I kept thinking from the first day I got the job, how are we going to marry New York City and the very colorful, sometimes wild world of Pedro Almodóvar? And somewhere in that tension is the answer. So Pedro came multiple times to New York to scout with me, and we did scouting not just to find locations, because we shot some of the film in New York and most of it in Madrid, but also for inspiration. And I introduced him to friends who are artists, journalists, because those were our main characters. And I also took him to a retrospective of Edward Hopper's work at the Whitney, which was really lovely because we all admire Hopper, but to really see his paintings in real life is a real pleasure. And so this mood board, which I was working on as we were working, it actually has some photos that we took in while we were scouting. There's pictures of our locations, and then there's a lot of beautiful Hopper paintings. And I tried to mix and match some samples of color, and it wasn't ever very specifically referenced. It was sort of our inspiration in general that we can move around in between.
So that was again you have a painting that I had on my mood board, and that then later on I transferred it to what the coming out was, because my references for the mood board of Pedro, there were a lot of paintings, and this is the way how I prepared it is like that both actors had like every single color. Both had red, both had blue, both had green, because a lot of people, they asked me, so did you have specific colors for one of the actors? And I said, well, no, that is with Pedro not possible, because he loves so much colors. And sometimes when he was bored and the actors were already dressed, he just said, hey, don't you have something else for Tilda? And that means that if I change Tilda, I also have to change Julian, so that it's still in harmony, everything. And so I really had a huge range of jumpers and blouses and sweaters and pants. And that is just like an image of one of these moments where I had to juggle, what do I do? One is in red, which other color fits in?
Yeah, and that also, of course, pertains to the production design work, because, again, with Pedro, he's very, very specific, and we go through many small details together. In the case of our main location, which was a house in the woods, which was meant to be in upstate New York, we had many visits to beautiful homes in upstate New York. We had made an early decision to keep the house in a modernist, perhaps contemporary modernist house. And we were inspired by some of the masters of early modernism who had perhaps moved to the US after or during the war and then started building around New York. So for example, one of them is Marcel Breuer, of which you could see a few of these homes, and a few other mid-century architects were really influential for us. What we loved about the Breuer homes were that they had like very specific points of color. And so after we visited all of these places in New York, but we had decided that we're going to be shooting this house in Spain, we then went through scouting outside of Madrid in areas that looked a little bit more like the mountains of upstate New York. And as we were looking for a contemporary house, we realized it's not going to be exactly like those homes. But once we found the house, we tried to work on a few of the details to connect with our visual ideas that were these striking colors. So when we had found our location, we actually did a lot of work with the cladding of the wood inside the house, and we clad some of the architectural elements like doors or cabinetry in colored vinyl, so that it looked like the type of color or formica that was kind of our inspiration from people like Breuer or Le Corbusier.
So this is a moment where they are watching the TV, and you will see obviously always a sofa is a very important item for the Pedro Almodóvar. And I don't know if it comes after this one. There's another sofa for picture, yeah, exactly. So there's another sofa. And I remember when we saw this is the studio building of the apartment of Tilda in New York. And so Inbal had to have this whole set ready 5 weeks before, but like totally ready. There is not one book that is not curated or is there by chance. It's everything, like Pedro looks at everything, every single book, every single teacup that is sitting there was curated by him. And when I saw a couple days before he visited, I saw the sofas. I said to Inbal, so are these now the sofas and the chairs that he has chosen? And she looked at me and said just like, no, there are 10 more outside in different colors. I said, so that is amazing. So which color should I choose for the sweater? And she says, well, I don't know, because we don't know what will happen with the sofa. And then also we have this sofa. Then we had, in the House of the Woods, we had a red sofa and a green sofa. And I was just saying, could we not have only one colored sofa? That is why I said, like, it is really important that I had so many different colors for them. This one is something that our friend Maura Gross, the makeup artist, always talks about, because obviously makeup is super important for the costumes and for the actors. And for example, here you see like 3 different reds. You see she wears a red sweater, she has a red wall behind her, and she wears a red lipstick. And this is something that we really collaborated and worked on together, and we discussed it. And Maura was often coming, but do you really think I can do the red lipstick? And I said, yeah, we go for it. I think it will work. And it comes very nicely together again with my Louis Bourgeois New York image.
It's true that a lot of us, together with Morag and the cinematographer Edu, we were always among ourselves conversing about this tension between what we consider a more realistic, naturalistic look and the world of Pedro. And this kind of give and take, we were very careful about that. And I would say that our first instincts were usually more naturalistic.
Yeah.
And we were sort of pushed towards the more Almodovar part, and we were always kind of pushing and pulling so that for me, because I'm from New York, I was always concerned that there's going to be a jarring moment in the movie where Julianne is like walking down the promenade and you see New York in the background, and then you're all of a sudden in Martha's apartment and it is an Almodovar universe. And then, you know, while we were shooting and we're discussing and thinking about things, I slowly realized that it's a Pedro movie, and Pedro has made his own rules of the universe, and that I think when people go to see his film, they are welcoming this sort of entrance to another sphere of color, and that we can let go a little bit of our more realistic way of looking at the world.
Yeah, and I know that same process was for Julianne Moore. She was also at the beginning, we always tried, or she was really insisting in the fittings, let's not forget the New York vibe, let's not. And then there was a moment, I remember exactly, in the dressing room, she just said to me, okay, it will be fine. It's an Almodovar movie. It will be fine. And here, this one, what I wanted to say, it's again about like the colors that then were reflected. With Pedro also what is, and we talked about that, I remember I did drawings, like aquarelle drawings of Julianne Moore dressed and trying to find her character and help him, that he sees her, even though she wasn't present in Madrid, that he can imagine how she would look in the costumes I had prepared. And he didn't look at them, he didn't react them, and they were huge, and he just ignored them. And I was really sad that he didn't look at the beautiful designs, and they had her face, everything. He didn't look at them. And then I talked to her, and you said the same thing, that he didn't really, he doesn't work with models or drawings. He has to see it in real. It doesn't correspond to any kind of drawings.
It's true, yeah, definitely. We tried our best to do, and I'll show you later, what we call previs in the business, which it could be perhaps a model, or it can be like a 3D image. But the thing is that it works for some directors, and some directors just don't respond, and you sort of have to know what tools would work for your director, because why waste the time doing like some very elaborate model if it's not really how the director thinks. So I think it's very helpful in the beginning of the production to sort of get more into your director's mind and their favorite ways of communicating visually. But I do think that those in the end helped all of us, like yes, with the cinematographer, makeup and hair, because those are more of our usual tools, and so we understood each other better with those.
So this is now an image that we did. We were shooting the library in New York, And obviously, like, we had very little prep time comparing to our Spanish prep time in New York. And for the costume design, for example, the costume for Julian was made. It is like especially the idea, the color. Again, I had several ones of the dresses made in different colors so that he could decide. The whole crowd outside was dressed because I thought it is the opening scene, and I know how much. He always said to me, please, I don't want to have boring crowd in New York. And I said, no, the crowd won't be boring. So we dressed the crowd. And the other actor is a friend of Pedro, so I had just the fitting, like, very briefly before we were shooting. And what I didn't realize until we did this one, that there is where I'm thinking that the intuition works, because if you look at the book that Inbal designed, and it's all about her book, and she's a writer, and you go how they both were dressed together, that they were blue and red. It was not something that we had talked about. It was just like that. And I thought it was very funny when we looked at the image on camera and said, look, it somehow comes all together again.
Yeah, I think that's one of the advantages of working on a Pedro Almodóvar film, is that you find these graphic images that really correspond with his sort of visual universe. And I wanted actually to mention something about this image, about like unexpected location accidents, because this is a famous bookstore in New York, Rizzoli, and we visited it, we scouted it, we had many, many photos. And then when we were there with the DP and we looked around, the DP said, wow, I mean, we had talked about how beautiful the floor was. And then he said, what if we actually did this overhead shot? It was an idea that came just from what we found on location. And then when we put all of those elements together, it really did all work in such a beautiful graphic way.
And now comes a very important set, obviously, because we are talking about a woman who is dying of cancer, was the hospital. And that is something very emotional. That is something very emotional for everybody on our set. And Pedro always had like the vision that don't come up with anything sad. So for me, for example, something as simple as the hospital gown, the whole outfit was based on that the hospital gown, the blue one, we brought in one from New York. We had it in several colors. We made, I don't know how many blues, so that Pedro could decide, and also the dressing gown we had in several colors. So again, that it matches with the set design, and that Pedro had really the options. And Tilda, when she put it on, she was like, oh my God, it's a dressing gown like the morning gown that fits me, because they are always too short. And I said, yeah, Tilda, we made it. And you have other 10 colors there, so, you know. And yeah, I think this was, again, a very strong collaboration.
Yeah, I wanted to show this image, which is a 3D mock-up of the room that we built on stage in Madrid, to show you, as we mentioned before, that we were really trying to explain to people, not just Pedro, the producers and our other collaborators, what we're doing. And so when you're building something from scratch at a studio, you can maybe see it because you're the production designer, but perhaps other people can't really see it. So we use a variety of method, and in this case, we made a 3D mock-up that was also in Unreal, to anyone who knows. And then we also made an actual film, which I don't have here, but it's a movie, it's like a video where you go in, you go to different part, you can see how the exterior is reflected closer to the character. And as you can see, we were testing some of our graphics because, as Bina mentioned, Pedro really didn't want it to be a drab room in a sad hospital. This is all about a celebration of life, even in its last stages. So we experimented with so many different kinds of wallpaper, different kind of designs that we designed ourselves. And in order to try and see all of these, not all of them could be seen in real life, although we tested quite a few, we used these kind of models to test some elements. I also wanted to mention that because we were shooting in Madrid, we had to make very large basically backings that looked like New York, and they were what we had outside of the window. So in order for everybody to also know what the view would look like, which is such an important part of any set, we also had these early drawings, and I think you can, yeah, here of course you can see the final result, and you can see behind Tilda and Julianne our backdrop that represented New York, which is out of a photo that we had taken ourselves in a really particular part of town where you could really see the New York skyline. And I think our last image is really just, how should I say, this is maybe a homage to our collaboration. It's an anecdote from set. One day we were about to shoot some big scene with a whole spread in the house in the woods on the table, and we were setting up two kinds of Hermes mugs to show Pedro, and Bina walked in and she was like, wow, wait a minute. And she went to the other room and brought two of her fitting photos that worked so beautifully with our Hermes mugs.
Yeah, so we could easier decide if the yellow cup is for Tilda or for Julie. And also this yellow costume that Tilda wore, that was an option that we had instead of the yellow suit, because Tilda and I, when we started in the beginning, we were both very, we had a little bit of problem to wrap our head around the yellow suit that he had always described in the her last scene. And so this was our alternative, and we really loved it because it was more cozy, it felt like more homey for that moment. And he said, well, I love it, it's really beautiful, but not for the last scene. I want that she dresses up and that it is a suit. And that is something that is so emotional, and I think that is all what it is about when you do contemporary costume design. What I really have to try to do to express the emotions and to translate it and to understand them and to translate them into clothes. And Tilda and I, we had to make the effort and understand what is going on in Pedro's head. And then I was very, very lucky at the moment when he really definitely rejected this version. He said, no, I still want to see the yellow suit. My assistant, lucky me that I have always good assistants, she said, you know that you have in a folder a Valentino yellow suit. And it was like 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I wrote them an email and I said, hey, what's going on with this yellow Valentino suit? Do you have it anywhere? And they said, yeah, they can ship it. And so they shipped it, and the next morning at 9 a.m., I don't know how they did it, it was there in Madrid. And I was like, what? And then the makeup artist Morak, she had a fitting with Tilda for a complete other scene. But I said, hey, I think that it would be really nice for Pedro to give him this surprise moment that Tilda would be in her last costume. And so she said, okay, let's do that. And I invited Tilda to put the yellow suit on, and she was like, what? Where does that now come from? And then Morak did her makeup, and when Pedro arrived at 12 to see what she had done with the makeup test, Tilda was standing there in the full suit with the full makeup, and that again shows how important a collaboration is, how beautiful it is when you have a team, you are surrounded with collaborators who can be flexible, who are there to help you. And I think for me it's something that also changed a little bit in the last years, that I think that the hierarchy changed, because when I started, I'm doing this now 40 years, especially costume designers in the costume department didn't really have a voice. For example, when did you ever have seen a costume designer on a jury? I'm the first costume designer here invited to the talents. All this is something that says something about my profession. And I think now it starts to change. We have much more to say. And I think we are really much more collaborators now, and we really exchange the moods. It's just another younger generation, and I think that is important. Because perhaps in the beginning of Hollywood it was like that the costume designers were very important because of all these beautiful gowns in the 30s, 40s, 50s, but then there was a moment where it got a little bit lost with the fashion of the 80s, 90s. And I think now it comes back, and we have a bigger voice, and we collaborate much more.
Yeah, that's a beautiful. That's a beautiful way to think about it. Another facet to that is that I think that we all, as department heads, need to be more proactive about engaging and creating that type of dialogue, because I'm sure, as you all know, usually when we get started, there's not enough time, there's not enough money, we're already running around trying to solve problems, and often what falls by the wayside is our time, our precious time, to speak with our other artistic collaborators and really go through the ideas. Often we spend that time with the director, but actually the joy is really sharing your artistic process with the other department heads. Especially on this film, actually, I really felt like we were sort of united in our search and quest through the film. And I do think that in a lot of other projects where, you know, I'm like, oh, well, but if I go over now to the costume department, that's half an hour from my day and so on. And you have to kind of recalibrate and say, this is extremely valuable, not just for me, for the other person involved, but for the film itself, and to really take that time and protect the time to have those type of artistic conversations.
And it also, this, what we are talking now about, comes a little bit together, what is these talents, the motto that it is, listening. I think listening is very, very important in our work, because at the beginning, the first thing that you have to listen is to the script. You read it and you have to listen to it, because that is, I think, for me, is the biggest tool that we have, is the script, and that we all have a vision about the script, and that I listen to your vision, and you listen to my one, and we integrate all our creative partners in crime that we have on each movie. And sometimes it's very difficult, because unfortunately, as we are all some kind of artists, there is a lot of ego going around, and sometimes you just can't make it and have perhaps a collaborator who doesn't want to communicate, and that always makes me very sad. But
maybe that's where the courageously comes from, listening courageously, because I feel like the listening is already pretty hard, but the listening courageously, you know, because it means you have to hear. Actually, I think that pertains to other department heads, because innately something that is going to be super important to me may not be that important to you or to the DP, but to actually listen to your collaborator and understand that this is really important to them, and you need to respect that because it is important to them. That's such an essential moment in collaboration, and once you get there, it also just makes the mood on set or in prep so much more, I think, nourishing.
yeah, totally. I know what you're talking about. Or I feel it, I can understand it.
Yeah. Well, okay, on that note, we can maybe open it up to questions from the audience. We'd love to take some questions and fully answer them well.
Thank you for your work, and beautifully, I love this, with your work in this Almodovar movie. I have a very general question. I mean, look at your own dresses and most people in this room. Why colors are so rare in real life these days in design? I think I wanted to ask this because I think you have a very good explanation for this. That's always I ask myself, why?
Sorry, I'm really sorry, but I didn't understand I think I didn't understand the most important part.
I ask why, I have a general question, why colors are so rare, even in your clothes, in most clothes of people in this room, in our everyday life, in design. Why don't we see
why
color?
they are so gray?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's very interesting because, for example, if you take my other works, there is Lydia Tarr, and her strongest color was a dark red, perhaps. So I think with the colors, it's often that you describe the emotions. And so I think there are more dramas, perhaps, like in life, we are going through a very difficult time. We are going to a very special time. And for example, often I work on contemporary movies that are coming out of, describe perhaps a sadness or something like that. And a lot of directors, I think they feel much more comfortable in muted colors because it translates more their storytelling. And yes, I think that it is much easier to dress in dark or in muted colors than to be colorful. And I think it corresponds a lot with the moment also, where in which city we live, because obviously if you go to India, it will be much more colorful, but here in Europe, we are, and especially in Berlin, it is very dark and gray. Sorry to say that, but I mean,
why,
there's no light.
Why in Western cities, people, I mean, I know it's not directly connected to movies, but I think because you think more than all of us about this, about color and dress, why in Western cities you don't see color? But in India and Africa is so much color.
Well, I think because in India with the saris, it is a long tradition, and that is just what the saris are, and that is their expression of their tradition, and it matches their history of fashion and of clothes. But here, especially now in all the big cities, it doesn't matter if it's Berlin, London, or Paris. Like the people that work in fashion mainly go and grab something black because it's easy to travel with black. It's easy, you feel like safe. It looks more elegant for most of the people. And for example, to dress up in colors, for me, it is much more difficult to really nail it with the color. It's much easier to go into a gray or into a black, you know? And also then the combinations is easier.
But I think that if we take the question to filmmaking, it's really the beauty of making films is you could really do whatever you want, and you can express New York in vivid colors because that exists, and those apartments exist, and those people exist in New York. They probably exist in Berlin, they exist in Madrid, they definitely exist in South America. And so I think as a filmmaker, you really do get to make your own narrative and your own colors. And I've seen incredibly colorful films that were almost like magical realism that were set in the immigrant neighborhoods of New York City, for example. So I think that just like in real life, you can take as much color as you want, make your home as colorful or as maximalist as possible. You could do that in films as well.
Thank you very much for your wonderful talk. I have a question regarding the long prep time that you guys have and whether that changes the design process very much, and also the idea to have the sets ready so much in advance. Do you have the urge to change things within like the 5 weeks?
I think that in this very, very rare case, which I doubt we would experience with other designers, unless other projects, unless it's a huge, huge movie, I think that it had very much to do with Pedro's process. So much of it was really because of how Pedro thinks and how things have to come together for him. So that sometimes we would have 5 meetings about one concept of a set to make sure everybody is feeling comfortable with it, and many, many, many meetings to even just decide the color of the fabric of the sofa. So most directors that I work with are not that detail-oriented with production design, and so it's not necessary for them. Personally, for me, I don't think that my concepts changed. I was just very, very much in conversation with Pedro, so that as the ideas were sort of shifting, that I could always react and also offer my own sort of point of view on it. But it was really mostly because this filmmaker works in this really particular way.
And also I think it is this, his obsession about every detail, like especially for you, like any little item that is there, every book, every DVD, everything went through his approval. And with the costumes for me, I have to say that honestly, after the first weekend I had, far before my prep time, they were both dressed, like we could shoot the next day. But then you know, you just bring more and more and more options so that he has all the richness that he wants and he wishes to then shoot. And it's not that I had an endless budget, not at all. I had a lot of time, but I had a limited budget. But it felt, I think he needs, because he is obviously not a young director, he needs also now like the safety that he really knows I can have that and I have everything, and he likes that. And I think also he deserves it. So.
But Bina, when you were working on Mulan, for example, which is such a huge movie, how was that like prep process in comparison?
Well, it's impossible to compare because Mulan is obviously a Disney movie, and I was working a year on Mulan, and we had, I had a workroom that, I had 120 people only in my workroom without counting all the workshops that were not included in my workroom, and it was such a long process, for example, to develop the armor and to make the armor. And we had for Mulan herself, for example, we had the armor that could get wet, we had the armor for the snow, we had the armor to fly around, we had the armor to mount on the horse, and then all these different armors she needed to have more than triple, because there were the stunt people, and there happened that, and then we had the second unit. So the amount of development of the armor took month and month and month, and a huge amount of budget. So it's a complete different approach. I think it is very interesting if you compare contemporary movie making and in the costume department to comparing period. And it's such a complete other approach, because I think in the period, it's much more that I design, I present, and then I go for it. I don't have to listen to the emotions of the director, you know? It's all about the richness of the costume making. I think there was a question.
Yeah. Hello, I'm Georg from Hamburg, and usually we in Hamburg wear blue suits like the sailors. Yeah, I'm not typical dressed, so excuse me. So speaking about costumes and budget, and regarding to this yellow suit of Tilda, it's not usual that a yellow suit flies first class from New York to Madrid. So that leads me to the question about your budget and your freedom and your struggle with the bookkeepers about your budget. You said 6 sentences ago you have a limited budget, but give me an impression about the budget for clothes and pictures in the background. And so I could imagine that famous stars, the actors, that they take a big look on their dressing, on their clothes, on their suits, and they think, I deserve a really cool look and don't care about the carpet or so. But of course, you said the director makes the decision, yeah? No, my question at the end is the budget, so yeah, that is
Okay. I think budget talk is very important. And I also love when I'm invited to talk in front of producers, or I go to any film school that invites me. I always go because I hope that I see their feature producers and I can let them know how it goes with the budget, and especially in my department. Because I don't need a big budget of costumes if I don't get the right amount of crew or the big enough truck, you know, because in Spain it happens often that they say, oh, I give you so much budget, let's say 100,000, just to say something. And then they give me a tiny little truck and I said, okay, what I'm doing with 100,000 of costumes that cost 100,000, and now I have this tiny little truck and it doesn't fit in. So I try to prevent that, and when I do a budget, I put everything in what I ever can and what I ever think that could happen. Like with the dailies and with anything what could be. But then I go to the producer and I always say, this is something flexible. It's something that we will creatively work on it. In November, I did a very small movie. I work often on very small movies with very small budgets. And we had like this production meeting, and everybody had a very good idea about a pregnancy belly, because she needed a pregnancy belly, and it was written that we see it. And it was the last scene. And nobody asked me. It was like the pregnancy belly doesn't have to do anything with costume. I said, wonderful. And they talked and talked and talked, and yeah, we can 3D print and we scan her, and she is now in New Zealand, but there are people that do that. And they were all super excited about it. And I said, okay, now, who knows how much that costs? Because I do. I can tell it now, right now, with the shipping costs, with the scan, with making it, how much it will be, and then I will tell you how much it will be to put it on her on a shooting day where we have exactly 2 hours for that scene. You need 2 hours before the makeup artist to put that belly on, and then perhaps it doesn't look good, and then you have to do it digitally anyway later. And all this process will cost like 5,000 to 10,000. I don't have it. I don't have the money. But I have a belly that is 200 euros. It's in my wardrobe truck, and I can just put a little tiny nightgown on top of it, and you can shoot. And I said to the director, it's your money, it's your movie, but I think you have to be very conscious where you want to spend your money on it. And it's not only the money, it is also the time to put this pregnancy belly on. And I tell you, this time is not in your schedule. So in a movie, for example, with Pedro, it's a little bit the same thing, you know. They always wanted to have great quality. It was definitely his most expensive project he has ever done. And the producers, they didn't understand my first vision of the budget at all. So I had very precise and very long discussions with them. And then we finally got to something where I was comfortable with. But then you have Pedro, you know, and Pedro, he loves, it was a very funny moment, because he loves this old-fashioned moment where he brings his Vogue journals and he has all these post-its in what he likes. And he shows me also, like he showed me a lot of things that were definitely for Inbal, but he doesn't care. And there was this leather jacket, beautiful, very expensive, Italian. And he said, I want this. And said, yeah, great, for whom? It's a man's jacket. Oh, I don't care, it can be for Tilda or for Julian. Okay? Next week call, 7,000. No, I think it was 8,000. I said, well, next time when I saw him, hey, I think you have to put a name to this leather jacket, because if I pass it to your producer, 8,000 euros, and I don't know for whom, I just order it because you want it, No. And he said, yeah, but I know them. They give me a discount. And I said, yeah, 10%, Pedro. I still need a name. And for me, it can be called Pedro. I don't know, but I don't have it in my budget. And then he got rid of it. Like, you know, it is just like you really have to communicate. And I think that I often hear from other designers that they have so much budget problems. Put everything in an Excel, everything. Then go several times through and think where you would like to put, to spend your money. What is really important? What is in the script the most important sentence, the most important part? And for example, there on my movie, I knew it was not the pregnancy belly. I had much bigger problems and issues than that pregnancy belly. And then you start to discuss, and then it is a creative discussion. And I think normally then you come to an end, and you come to an end where you can work comfortably. And I think that is very important.
I think that in terms of production design, the budgeting process is very, very complex because we have many sets and we can't necessarily start with a rough budget when we don't have even a build started. And so the important thing is to always keep the channels open and have constant conversations with the producers, especially to bring in these special director's requests and when unexpected things happen, like we lost a location or the director wants to build a bridge. And so on, and to really be very, very transparent and explain exactly, as Bina said, to the producers, what is the consequence of every request. I think that that's really hard to do. It's hard to also keep like a civil atmosphere when having these kind of conflict-prone conversations. But I do think that what is more important than just sharing figures is exactly as Bina expressed the conversation about the pregnancy belly, is explaining what is exactly where the money is going towards. So having the producers in our workshops, having them come to our carpentry shop, coming to the set as it's getting built, and so that those numbers actually translate to reality. And I think for us, we tend to be pretty flexible artists. I mean, to put things in perspective, even though this was probably one of Pedro's more expensive films because we shot in New York and Madrid, I think it was probably around 15 million euros. His films are usually about 10, 12 million euros. But that would be considered like a fairly indie movie in the US. So we are always working between really large films and really small films. And our hope is that when we present a budget, that the producers would understand through our experience that we're good for it, that there is a reason for every number, and that that's basically the springboard for a more constructive conversations.
First, thank you so much for the talk. And you talked a lot about the colors you choose, but I was also wondering about the materials, like especially in the production design. So, because when you have so vibrant colors, like, so they don't cancel each other out or overwhelm each other, and also how they work together with the costume.
Yeah, materials, definitely. I mean, the number one thing about materials is always to be able to feel things and really look at them in real life, whereas nowadays we're used to online shopping and we order things very quickly on Amazon and so on, but actually seeing things in front of our eyes. And Pedro is really tactile. He really needs to touch things. So are we, obviously, so we connect with that. And so that having samples of materials is such a good best practice, like really having everything there. If you are not sure about something, order a sample and then show look at with your team. A lot of times for me, I try to get samples of the various materials, put them together, and have the team look through them. Like on my last film, I had a sample of a possible wall-to-wall carpet with our entire sample of 5 colors for the set, for the walls, and then with a part of our build, And I was there with the art director, set decorator, looking together at that. I think that putting all of that together in real life is very helpful. In terms of the project with Pedro, a lot of it was about textiles, because he really loves textiles, and it's important to him to actually feel the couch, which you may not know as a spectator. For us, usually I think for me, it's a bit more about the warmth or cold nature of materials. So for example, in the house in the woods, the location that we found was extremely contemporary. It had like very white walls, very blonde wood. And I felt like mid-century type, like inviting spaces always have darker wood and a bit of a darker tone. And specifically to that story, it's where the character spends her last days. It needs to feel like a safe haven. And the house we entered was just too cold to feel like a safe haven. And so I had to persuade the producers, which I'm really happy they were persuaded, because it was a huge job, to change all of the wood in the house to reclad it in warmer wood. And that was, all of the walls were actually clad in wood about 3/4 up. So that was a very large job. And we repainted in another white color. So like the difference, if if you're a producer and you're like, wait, we're painting another type of white, but it was a warmer white, and it makes a really big difference when you look at the frame. So you have to be very conscious of how materials read in terms of their warmth, or if you're doing another type of film and you want it to be a very exacting, minimalistic, and cold world, then the materials really matter.
And I think what you said, it makes a huge difference in the frame. I think also about the materials, what is very important is how they are looking on film. And for example, for Pedro, he expresses himself always, is that good quality? And I know what he means with good quality. He means, does it photograph beautiful? Because for him, good quality is the synonym to that it will photograph well. And he is somehow also often right for his movies, that he always wants to touch it, and he always asks what kind of material is it, because he can then translate it, how it will look on screen and how it will photograph. And me personally, I also think that, I often think, when I choose the material, I always think, how will it look on screen? Because that is, at the end, is the most important. And so that I find really difficult when you work on a low-budget movie and you don't have a camera test. That is something that makes me nervous, because I think it is extremely important that you do it. And for example, now I'm also working on a super, super low budget. And we just did like a camera test just between the DP and the director and the actors and myself, and I didn't have a chance really then to go and see it on a big screen, the camera test. We just watched it on the computer, and I took a lot of pictures on my iPhone, but it helped me to know what kind of colors I want to use and how we will retreat the materials, and there were a lot of windows in the house, and how the reflection of the light works out. And so I think camera tests are super important for us, and it's a pity that often they got scratched off the budget.
Yeah, I also actually that was my note as well, that camera tests are really essential. And for the art department, we try to bring things, for example, like wallpaper, perhaps patterns that we're not quite sure about, whether they're going to be kind of too noisy for camera. It's also really important for both of us that with the cinematographer, usually they work out the LUT, which is a sort of their coloring method during the camera test, so that when we see a color, we obsess over small hues between this kind of yellow and that kind of yellow. But then in the coloring session of the post-production, the cinematographer could just, whoop, all of a sudden it's orange. So it's very important in the camera test to already speak to the cinematographer and obviously the director, because it's a joint decision. What exactly is the, in digital, it's called LUT. And if you're shooting on film, then it's obviously how you're going to color the images and you can see them in the test. So I agree. And what was beautiful actually about Pedro, which happens rarely, but has definitely happened to me before, is you're not just doing the camera test, you're invited to watch the results on a large screen at the, for us it was deluxe, but usually at the Post House. And he invited everyone. He invited makeup and hair, we were all there. And that is a very beautiful, I think, old school way of doing things where everyone can converse about what they're seeing, and I definitely encourage all of you to ask for that.
Hi, I was curious to ask you, what about how do you find the inspiration when maybe you find yourself that something is not working, that maybe you feel stuck, maybe you have some kind of practices or just ways of finding that inspiration? And also, just if you remember, maybe you could tell us briefly what inspired you to create costumes for Only Lovers Left Alive. I think it's also very beautiful. Thank you.
So I think the thing with the inspirations, obviously there's always a moment where I have a panic attack and I think, oh my God, I don't have any kind of inspiration. I'm completely flat. So again, I think for me, my intuition is very important. So I know I go to certain bookstores and suddenly I find that book. I go to an exhibition as I did it in Vienna and I found the inspiration. I watch a movie. It's something that I'm just like all alert to where can I get an inspiration. For a costume designer, when you do contemporary, for me, for example, it's super important to go on the underground. Like I move around, I move around, I look at the people, how they are dressed, I find people and I see something and I said, that is an inspiration. I'm completely in alert constantly. Once I have the idea, once I have the script, my biggest tool, just my whole brain always goes around that story. And when it's period, then obviously I go to all the museums, I go to paintings. And for example, a movie I did a year ago, and it was about a pop star. I had my first meeting when I was in Canada, and I didn't have my library, and I didn't have time to go and buy anything. And just before the meeting with the director, I went into a store, and they had like paper magazines, and they were about nature, but very modern, and they were super interesting. And so I did my first moods based on this nature pictures, and it was about a super famous pop star, but it worked. And actually there's another production designer here, she worked on it. And on the last image and after a year we finished the movie, we remembered these nature moods, and I saw her stage, and it was exactly like it came together. The nature was on the stage in her digital panels that she had put on the stage. So I think the inspiration even for costumes can be completely abstract for me, that it works somehow like that. And the inspiration for Only Lovers Left Alive, that brings me to something that I also always think it is a huge advantage. If you have somebody that you know already in your crew, or if you repeat with an actor, or you repeat with a director, or you repeat with a production designer, it gives you so much shortcuts. So I had worked with Jarmusch before on another movie, and there was also Tilda. So I had the huge advantage that I knew Tilda already, and I knew Jarmusch. And I'm a huge Jarmusch movie fan. I saw them all, and I know somehow, I grew up with them. It's for me, that is part of my love for movies is based on his movies. And so on Only Lovers Left Alive, he worked with the first time with the DP and the first time with the production designer. And I had made like a mood board on old paper, and then I aged it, and with my assistant, we are stitching on all the photographs with the machine and also fabrics, and it was foldable because I thought I will travel so much, so I need something that is like this size. And so then when we had the first meeting with Jim Jarmusch, and Tilda was there, and the DP and the production designer, I unfolded this paper. And that was for us like the inspiring moment. And there were like vintage photos, old photos, and the fabrics and the velvets and the silks. And I had written their poems that were mentioned in the script on it, and that was somehow our mood. And Tilda wanted to have a concept much more elaborated. She wanted to have much more accessory. And Jim had really this idea of a very slim, clean body. And we talked a lot about how would a vampire dress, how would a person dress if you live 500 years? And I just thought, I think you go and get it to a very simple, like you lose everything, and also because she was actually only interested in books. And I thought, you are not any longer interested in any accessories. You are only interested in your books and your like music, but not any longer in anything what is fashion. And that is why we went to this very slim line, and Tilda at the end, then she said, yeah, I got it. Now I know where you want to go.
Yeah, I think the question is really interesting because it's not just about where to find inspiration, which I agree, the world is our oyster, but what happens when something isn't working, or perhaps you thought you had the best concept and then all of a sudden you're not on the same page as the director. And I feel like it's really important for us to be able to protect moments for reflection while we are in the madness of shooting, because you end up kind of pulled in a million directions and you're like, wait, but when do I design the set? And really the set could be anything. If you're building on a stage, it's like a blank canvas. So how to find the moments to close the door on all of the requests and all of the noise and just really think, okay, where did this not work? And how should we maybe tweak it? And maybe you need to take a walk. Maybe you need to, go to nature but actually protect those moments of meditation. So you're not, every time I've made a design decision under duress, like, oh my God, wait, I have to pick a color, I have to pick the color. It's always gonna be the wrong color and we would repaint. So really kind of finding your inner quiet moment to maybe readjust. I think that's very important. And then, again, like, how to readjust, I think it's also being like very flexible in your designs and not ever thinking that there's one perfect solution, because filmmaking, more than so many other arts, is really pure collaboration. And we actually were there many times when it was like, wait a minute, do you have another pillowcase? Because the hospital robe is not working with this color, or like, oh, we need to switch the sweater because the background that we're standing against. And so there's a lot of in the moment decisions that you need to be very flexible on and not just say, oh no, this is completely ruining my design concept.
I also have to say that, for example, on Mulan, I had like, there was a moment where I had like a creative breakdown, because I had to come up with a new idea, and it was very complicated and I didn't know where to find it. And also on this pop star movie, I had a completely moment where I was 4 weeks completely stuck and I didn't know where to go. And I think for me, for example, walking is I have to move to find my ideas, and then I have to be surrounded with people I can trust and with my team, because I listen to them, they know me, we just come together and I get inspirations, and often then we have really like to go and do a brainstorming. And for example, in Mulan, it was funny during the week I had so much to do and I had to answer so many questions that I never had time really to be creative. And then on Saturday, Sunday, I went into the workroom and I hoped that it would be empty so that I was alone between my fabrics and I could like think. And then I often find somebody else, like one of the pattern makers or the prop master in my team or whatever. And I was like, what are you doing here? And you said, we don't talk because we just had to be on ourselves and be focused. But then suddenly you come together and you do a brainstorming and you try to lift the other people up and then you start and keep going. But I think, especially when you are doing a movie where you have a workroom, this inspiration of my crew is very important for me.
I really believe actually that in the power of randomness, a little bit like Dada, that when you're stuck, you actually need to recalibrate in maybe a radical way. And so I always keep with me, I don't know if you know Brian Eno's deck of cards. It's called Oblique Strategies, and it is an incredible, I always recommend it to artists. It's an incredible form of rethinking your work. It's basically a set of instructions, very, very abstract, on how to rethink your pattern when you're making art. And so I carry this deck everywhere with me, and when I'm in a moment of crisis, I just pull a card, and it usually says something very, very experimental. And you take a moment and you can actually maybe put your work in a different context. And that's actually something I really learned from Pedro, because I come from a very rational way of thinking. Like, if I think of the characters and their surroundings, it's like, okay, Ingrid, how old is she? Where did she grow up? She lived in New York in the 80s. Where would her apartment be in New York? If her apartment is there, what kind of furnishings would she have? I mean, it's obvious to me because I know these people and I know their world. But Pedro has a much more instinctive way of bringing things together, and he often can't really explain why these things belong together. So we would have many meetings where I'm like, okay, yeah, she would have this painting because, or she'd have this poster because she probably is subscribed to Lincoln Center and that's where she goes to see movies, and this is blah, 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 blah. Like all these narratives that go in, it's like we could write books about the worlds that surround our characters. And then Pedro would be like, I think that this couch should be blue with red piping. And I'm like, wait, what? And so something about that, it was sometimes very challenging, but in reflection on the entire experience, I found it liberating, because how do we actually randomize our patterns of thought, especially on design? When you really start thinking about it, we condition ourselves to our own artistic processes, and perhaps some of our patterns repeat, especially when we grow older and perhaps more experienced. And so the randomness breaks through it. And so I've been talking to my other collaborators, so a lot of production designers that I converse with, like, how can we randomize a little bit our own bringing together of elements so that something really original can come from it and not just a copy of a Pinterest page. So.
Hi, you kind of started getting in there. When you work with a director that your instincts and choices don't really match, and your design concepts slowly goes towards a place where you're not that happy with it, is there ways of like keeping it exciting and something you're proud of while still serving the director's vision?
Yeah. I mean, I can't say that I've ever had an experience where I am absolutely out of my depth and we don't see eye to eye. I kind of, when I interview, I usually already bring mood boards that are probably fairly detailed. So to me, it's like, okay, probably it's best in the interview to find out if you're pretty much on the same page, because it's very hard to know if you're going to get along in your own personalities, but at least let's know that we're seeing the same things. And I think perhaps where it's hardest to tell is when directors are perhaps less visual and more, maybe they're writer-directors, they are maybe, they come from theater. Like I worked with Martin McDonough, who is a well-known playwright, and to him, the script is the most important thing, and he thinks about every comma, but he perhaps doesn't quite know how to express the visual world that he sees in his head. And some directors like Luca Guadagnino that I worked with are extremely visual, and I can say one word and he could say one word and we know already the whole thing. So I think a lot of it is actually in the beginning understanding how the director is going to communicate about visuals so that you don't find yourself in a totally different place. But I think the closest experience that I had to not really getting the director was I made a film in Africa called Beasts of No Nation with Kerry Fukunaga, and I realized perhaps 2 weeks into being in Ghana that I was really off, and it had to do with the scope of the storytelling, because we had very little money, and I had imagined that we're making like a small indie film in Africa, and I think that Kerry thought we're making like Titanic. Like he is a very epic storyteller. And I didn't see that until it was almost too late. And when he thinks about things, it's just very, very big in scale. And perhaps at that time I was thinking of things more intimately. So, it wasn't like, oh, I think this house should look like this and like that. It was much more conceptual, so that you sort of have to recalibrate the way you see things, not necessarily like, okay, this is the color of the chair. And I think it's hard to do because I think you perhaps lose some trust when the director realizes you're not exactly on their page, and it's how to keep the process open even when you're not exactly there so that you can get to that place together. What do you think? Have you had these kind of experiences?
I think I had one film where I knew I was not in the sync with the director, but actually it was not about the clothes. I think it was about human being. And I decided to abandon.
Which is a very important moment in every creative person's life, is when do we say this is not for me?
Yeah, I was very lucky because the main actor actually was a friend of mine, and he said to me in the prep time already, Bina, never forget, you can leave, I can't. And then there was the moment, like, he was sitting on the set and I was looking around and he looked at me and I just said, okay, this is now the moment. But it was a very extreme moment, and I don't want to wish anybody that happens. It was not very nice, and it's years and years ago, but I don't want to go through that again. And I think I would, exactly in the interview, I would feel something like that already. And I wouldn't go for it again, never again.
In fact, I think that most misunderstandings actually happen from a human factor, and it's not ever really about the design. It's kind of about your aura. I don't know. Yeah. And so it's, I feel like we spend actually more time in people skills than in design. And since, as you probably all know, it's a really, really intense emotional period where you're talking to 100 people every day and everybody has their own egos and their own priorities, I kind of wish we had more training in film school to know how to work with our collaborators than to know how to draft a stairwell.
Your reference pictures, you share all your background you have for the project, and you share the references and the inspirations. Do you also have a secret reference that you really keep to yourself that carries you through the movie that maybe is something totally different, like music or whatever, personally to you, that you can rely on or go back to when you are stuck or are in a difficult position that's really just yours?
I don't have a secret, no. I'm very open, sorry. No, I share everything. And what I also like, I put images in my mood board that I don't like. No, because that often the images that I don't like, if then the director reacts and he also doesn't like it, then I'm on the good way. But if I only put I always put images that I really don't like one or two, because that reaction for me tells me a lot.
I think that it's a little bit less about secret references, because I agree, we share as much as possible, but it's maybe about our support system outside of work, so that you always have, you can maybe share an outside moment with your family or your friends, and you can sort of pull yourself out because you get sucked in. Like, I can't even watch movies when I'm working on a movie because it's a different story and it's going to taint my inner world, and let alone like read books. So you're so immersed and it's hard to maybe see things in perspective. So I feel like the one thing that gets me out of it is family and friends, and being able to just relate what you're going through to other people.
And for me also, yes, is important in the creative process, that I have a nice, I need a nice environment. I need a nice office. That's also something often the producers forget, that we are creatives, and that it's important for me what I see every day. I need somehow a nice workspace, because I'm sitting there often 14 hours, and I just need to get the inspiration there in that room, and it has to be nice. So that is for me, for example, something like my secret weapon, that I try to construct a nice space.
It's good to be in the art department because we shop for set decoration, and then we're able to use it in our own offices. But yeah, I agree, having, and not just a nice environment, but a welcoming place that is kind of like a calm space to escape to every once in a while from the madness.
Thank you so much. I know there are a lot more questions in the room, and I think this is just for us also a sign that we need and want to continue these conversations. Hope to have you back and have some of your colleagues back, and also all our other fields of work to open the discussions with costume design, production design you already do, and that is important and worth it. And thank you so much for being with us. Thank you so much, and let's continue.